Good evening, and welcome back to our quiet corner of Edwardian England, where the lamp is low and a place is kept for you by the window. Tonight, we travel to a small country town in Norfolk, in the soft gold of a September evening, 1908. A young woman named Cecilia Draycott, 26, one of the first women in England to qualify as a doctor, has come alone to take up her first post, uncertain whether the town will trust a lady doctor. In the old doctor's surgery, she finds his casebook, a worn leather volume filled with 40 years of his careful hand. And as she reads it by lamplight, she begins to feel that its pages know the town better than she does, and that its quiet wisdom is guiding her through her first uncertain rounds. So rest your head and dim your light. If you find comfort in these quiet tales, do stay and subscribe, and let us keep this corner glowing for you, and tell us softly, where are you listening from tonight? Now, let us begin. The evening train set Cecilia Draycott down at the little Norfolk station, just as the September light was beginning to fail, and she stood a moment on the quiet platform, her leather doctor's bag in one hand and her small trunk beside her, and looked about at the town that was to be, for the first time in her life, entirely her own to serve. It was a small town, she could see at once, a small quiet country market town, low and old and comfortable under the wide, flat Norfolk sky. The station lay a little way out from it, and beyond the platform she could see the huddle of brick and flint roofs, the square grey church tower, a windmill dark against the last of the gold, and the soft mist already gathering over the water meadows and the river. It was very quiet. A porter took her trunk. A dog barked somewhere. The train drew away behind her with a sigh of steam, and then there was only the deep, soft quiet of the country evening, and the mist, and the failing gold light, and Cecilia, standing alone on the platform at the edge of the town she had come to doctor. She was 26, and she was a doctor, and she could still scarcely believe either thing. It had been such a long road to this quiet platform. She had wanted to be a doctor since she was a girl, since before it seemed a thing a girl could even wish, had set her heart on it against every gentle discouragement, every raised eyebrow, every kind soul who told her it was no calling for a woman, and she would do better to give it up. She had not given it up. She had studied and saved and won her place at the London School of Medicine for Women, that brave, embattled place where a few hundred determined women were making themselves into doctors in the teeth of a doubting world. And she had worked there through years of study and hospital wards and examinations, harder than she had ever worked at anything, until at last, at long last, she had qualified and was a doctor, a real one, with the letters after her name and the right to practice, one of the first women in all England to hold them. There had been times she had thought she would never do it. There had been the long, cold years of study, the lectures where she and the other women sat apart, the examinations sat twice as hard because so much was doubted of them, the small daily slights and the great weariness. But she had wanted it more than she had wanted ease, or comfort, or the settled, ordinary life her family had gently urged on her. She had wanted, with her whole steady heart, to heal, to be of use, to do this good, hard, necessary work. and she had held to that, wanting through everything. And it had carried her through and made her, at the last, what she had always meant to be, a doctor. She said the word to herself sometimes, still, quietly, hardly believing it. Dr. Draycott. It was hers. She had earned it, and it had brought her here. For it was one thing to qualify, and quite another to find a place to practice. The great London hospitals would not have a woman, and few enough towns would. And Cecilia, newly fledged and quite without means, had taken the first post she could find, which was this one, a quiet country practice in a small Norfolk town, whose old doctor was retiring, and whom no young man had wished to succeed, so far from everything, so quiet, so poor. They had been doubtful, she knew, the town worthies who had appointed her. Doubtful of a woman, doubtful of one so young, but they had been unable to find anyone else, and so they had taken her on trial, warily. And here she was, arrived in the September dusk, to be the doctor of a town that was not at all sure it wanted her. That was the thing that weighed on her, standing on the quiet platform. Not the work. She did not fear the work. She had trained long and hard, and knew herself capable. It was the doubt she feared, the wariness, the long, slow suspicion of a country town toward a stranger, a young woman, a lady doctor, such a thing as most of them would never have seen. Would they let her tend them? Would they trust her, believe in her, call her when they were ill? Or would they send instead for the old doctor, or the doctor in the next town, anyone rather than the young woman they did not trust? She did not know. She knew only that she had come a very long way, and fought a very long fight to be a doctor, and that whether she would be allowed to be one, here in this quiet, doubtful town, remained still to be seen. She took up her bag and left her trunk to the porter, and walked into the town in the gathering dusk. It was a pretty town, she thought, walking in. A pretty, quiet, old country town, its one main street winding gently up from the meadows to the market square, lined with low brick and flint houses and small shops with their shutters going up for the night. Gas lamps were being lit here and there, glowing soft gold in the blue dusk. A few late folk were about, a woman drawing in her washing, a man leading a horse, 2 children running home, and they looked at Cecilia as she passed, at the strange young woman in the dark tailored coat with the doctor's bag, looked at her with the frank, open curiosity of country people at a stranger. And she felt their eyes and walked on, composed and steady, and did not let them see how her heart beat. She was used to being looked at, she told herself. A woman doctor was a thing to be looked at. She had been looked at all through her training, in the streets and the hospitals and the lecture halls, and she had learned to bear it, to walk through it, calm and straight and unhurried, giving no one the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She would need that calm here, she thought. She would need it every day until the looking stopped, until she was no longer the strange young lady doctor, but only, simply, the doctor, trusted and ordinary, and theirs. If that day ever came, she did not know whether it would. But she walked on through the dusk toward the square, composed and straight, and meant to earn it if she could. The surgery was in the market square, they had told her. The old doctor's house, where she was to live and practice, taken over along with the practice. I'm Dinah Meacham. I keep the house for you, as I kept it for old Dr. Fothergill these 20 years. Come in, come in. There's a fire lit, and your supper keeping warm, and everything ready for you. Come in, and welcome. And Cecilia, stepping in over the threshold, out of the misty dusk into the warm, lamplit hall, felt something ease, a very little, in her anxious breast. For she had not been sure, till that moment, that anyone at all in this town would be glad to see her. And here was this warm, kind woman, welcoming her as though she had been waited for, wanted, expected. It was a small thing, but Cecilia had come a long, anxious way, and it warmed her more than she could say. Mrs. Meacham, whose name was Dinah, took her coat and her hat and bustled her through into a warm sitting room, where a fire burned bright and a supper was laid, and fussed over her and fed her and talked comfortably all the while. And Cecilia, tired and anxious and hungry, sat by the fire and ate and let herself be fussed over, and felt the long day's strain begin, a little, to loosen. Dinah Meacham had kept house for the old Dr. Fothergill for 20 years, she learned, had stayed on when he retired to keep it for whoever came after, and was plainly delighted, whatever the rest of the town might feel, to have a new doctor in the house at last, and did not seem to mind in the least that the new doctor was a young woman. "Dr. Fothergill's that pleased you've come," she said, pouring Cecilia's tea. It was another kindness, another small welcome, in a day she had feared would hold none, and she went up at last to her bed in the small, comfortable room Dinah had made ready, tired and anxious still, but a little comforted, and slept in her new house, in her new town, at the beginning of her new life. The next morning she woke early and lay a while in the grey light, listening to the small sounds of the waking town, the church clock, a cart in the square, a cock crowing somewhere. And then she rose and dressed in her plain, dark, practical clothes, and went down to begin her first day as the doctor of the town. Dinah gave her a good breakfast, and after it, Cecilia went through, for the first time properly, into the surgery, the consulting room and the dispensary, the working heart of the practice that were now hers. And she stood in the doorway of the consulting room and looked and was moved more than she had expected. For it was a real doctor's room, an old country doctor's room, worn and comfortable and complete, and it was hers. There was the examination couch and the desk and the deep leather chair. There was the glass-fronted cabinet of instruments, the little brass scales, the shelves of bottles and jars. There was the faint, clean smell of carbolic and old leather and dust. There was everything, in short, that made a place a surgery, a doctor's own room, the room where she would tend the town. And Cecilia stood and looked at it, her surgery, and felt rising in her, under all her anxiety, a deep, quiet joy. For whatever the town might think of her, whatever doubt she must overcome, this was hers now, this good old room, and she was a doctor, and here was where she would do her work. She thought of all the years she had dreamed of, exactly this. A room of her own, a practice of her own, patients of her own to tend and heal. Through all the long study, when the goal had seemed so far, she had held before her the image of just such a room, just such a life. And here it was, real, about her, hers. It did not matter in that moment that the town was doubtful, that the road ahead was hard. She was standing in her own surgery, a qualified doctor, ready to begin, and the deep, quiet joy of it filled her and steadied her and made her, for that moment, entirely unafraid. She went about it slowly that first morning, learning it, opening the cabinet, looking at the instruments, reading the labels on the bottles, finding where everything was kept, making it her own. Old Dr. Fothergill had left it all in good order. She saw everything clean and ready, as though he had tidied it with care for whoever should come after. And she was grateful to him, the old man she had not yet met, for leaving her so good and ready a room. And it was as she went through the desk, the big old mahogany desk that stood in the window, learning its drawers, that she found the book. It was in the deep bottom drawer, alone. A large old book, worn and heavy, bound in brown leather, gone soft with age, its corners capped in tarnished brass. She lifted it out and set it on the desk and opened it, and saw that it was a casebook, an old doctor's casebook, filled from end to end in a small, careful, faded hand, page after page after page. The record, she realized, of Dr. Fothergill's 40 years of doctoring in this town. Every case, every patient, every illness and remedy and visit, set down in the old man's patient hand across 40 years. The whole long medical life of the town, its births and its ailments and its healings, kept in this one worn leather book. Cecilia sat down slowly in the leather chair, with the old casebook open before her in the morning light, and turned its soft, worn pages, and was moved and fascinated and strangely comforted. For here, in this book, was everything she needed and did not have: the knowledge of the town. She did not know these people, their names, their families, their constitutions, their long histories of health and illness. She came a stranger, knowing nothing. But the book knew. 40 years of them were here, set down in the old doctor's careful hand. And she thought, turning the pages, that if she read it, studied it, learned it, she might come to know the town through the old man's eyes, might carry his 40 years of knowing into her own new doctoring, might not be so entirely a stranger after all. It was a treasure, she saw, the old man's parting gift, whether he had meant it so or not, the distilled wisdom of a lifetime's care, left in the drawer for whoever should come after, waiting for her. She turned the pages slowly, and the old town rose up out of them, page by page, year by year, the fevers of hard winters, the summers of good health, the children brought safe through their childhood ailments and grown, she supposed, to have children of their own, the whole long, patient chronicle of a country doctor's care, 40 years of it, written in one steady hand, and Cecilia, bending over it, felt oddly less alone than she had felt since she came, as though the old doctor, whom she had not yet met, were sitting beside her through his book, telling her quietly all he knew, handing her his town, his life's work, his 40 years of knowing, that she should not have to begin quite empty-handed and afraid. It was the kindest thing, she thought, that anyone had done for her yet. She could not read the old hand easily at first. It was faded and crabbed and close, and she had to bend close over the page in the morning light, her spectacles pushed down to make it out at all. But she found, as she turned the pages, that here and there her eye caught a name, a case, a note. and she read a little and was drawn in. And she sat a long while in the leather chair in the morning light, bent over the old casebook, reading the 40-year record of the town she had come to serve, and did not notice the morning passing until Dinah came to tell her that her first patient had come. Her first patient was a child, and it was the casebook, oddly, that told her what to do. The child was brought in by its mother, a thin, anxious woman who came into the surgery with a frightened little girl of 6 or 7 by the hand, and stood in the doorway, looking at Cecilia with the wary, doubtful look Cecilia was learning to expect. The look that said, plainly, that she had come because there was no other doctor to be had, and would rather, if she were honest, have had a man. But the child was ill, feverish and fretful, with a hot, dry skin and a sore throat, and the mother was frightened, and so she had come, doubtfully, to the lady doctor, because her child was sick, and there was no one else. Cecilia took the little girl gently and sat her on the couch and examined her, calm and kind and unhurried in the way she had learned. And it was, she saw at once, nothing very grave. A common childish fever, a sore throat, the sort of thing that frightens a mother badly and passes with care in a few days. But the child was frightened and would not open her mouth for the throat to be looked at, and shrank and cried. And the mother grew more anxious still, and Cecilia, for a moment, felt the whole thing hanging in the balance. This first case, this first frightened family, and knew that how she managed it, whether she could soothe the child and reassure the mother, might set the whole town's opinion of her, might make or mar her here. She had learned, in her training, that a doctor heals not only with medicine, but with manner, that half of tending the sick is easing their fear. And she had a gift for it, a real one, a deep, natural calm that quieted the frightened and steadied the anxious. But a gift is one thing, and a doubtful town another, and she knew that this thin, anxious mother had come to her doubting, half wishing she had not come at all, and that if the child cried and would not be soothed, the mother would go away surer than ever that a lady doctor was no use, and tell her neighbours so, and the doubt would harden all through the town. So much, Cecilia thought, hung on one frightened child and one tin of sweets. And it was then that she remembered the casebook, for she had been reading it that very morning, and had come, by chance, upon an entry, years old, in the old doctor's hand, about this very family. She was almost sure this very sort of case, a feverish, frightened child, and how the old doctor had won it round. He had a way with frightened children, the old notes had said, or something like it. He kept a tin of barley sugar in the surgery, and gave a sweet before ever he looked at a throat, and made a game of it, and so won the child's trust before he began. Cecilia had read it and smiled that morning at the old man's kindly craft, and now, with the frightened child before her, she remembered it and looked and found, sure enough, on the dispensary shelf, an old tin of barley sugar, kept there these 40 years, and she took a sweet from it and gave it to the little girl and smiled and made a small game of the examination, exactly as the old notes had said. And the child, comforted, took the sweet and grew calmer, and opened her mouth at last and let herself be looked at, and the thing was done. Cecilia gave the mother her instructions, calm and clear and reassuring. It was a common fever, nothing grave. The child must be kept warm and quiet and given plenty to drink, and this simple, soothing draught. And she would call again tomorrow to see how the child did. And the mother, reassured by Cecilia's calm sureness, and by the child's own comfort, and by the sweet, and by the promise of a visit, went away easier than she had come, looking at the lady doctor with a little less doubt, a little more trust than she had brought in. And Cecilia, when they had gone, sat down in her leather chair and let out a long breath, and thought that it had gone well, her first case, better than she had dared hope, and that she owed it, in no small part, to the old Casebook and the old doctor's 40 years of kindly craft that had told her at exactly the right moment exactly what to do. It was the first of many such times. For as the days went on, and the weeks, and Cecilia settled into her doctoring of the town, she found the Casebook again and again her guide and her friend. Each evening, by the lamp, she read in it, a little at a time, the old faded hand growing easier as she learned it, working her way through the 40-year record of the town. And she found, again and again, that what she read there was exactly what she needed. The morning she was called to an old man with a bad chest, she had read, only the night before, the old doctor's notes on that same old man, his history, his weakness, the remedy that had always served him best. The day a farmer's wife was brought to bed of a child, she had read, that very week, of the births in that family, and knew what to expect, and was ready. Time and again, the Casebook seemed to go before her, to know, before she did, whom she would see and what she would need, so that she came to each new case not empty and afraid, but armed with the old doctor's 40 years of knowing, as though he stood at her shoulder still, telling her quietly what to do. The evening before she was called out to a shepherd's cottage on the edge of the heath, she had read, without seeking it, the old doctor's notes on that lonely family, their pride, their poverty, the gentle way one must offer them help so as not to wound them. And so she went forewarned, and was gentle, and did not offend, and was let in where a blunter hand would have been turned away. The morning, an old woman came with a trouble she was too shy to name. Cecilia had read, the night before, of that same shy old soul, and knew, and spared her the naming, and won her lasting love. It was as though the book laid out her days before her, quietly, one lamplit evening at a time, so that she never came to a door quite unprepared. She could not always account for it. That was the strange thing, the thing she turned over in her mind, of an evening, reading by the lamp. It was natural enough that the Casebook should hold what she needed. It held the whole town, 40 years of it, and whatever case she met, its like would surely be somewhere in those pages. But it was the timing of it that she could not quite explain. The way she seemed, so often, to have read the very entry she needed the very night before she needed it, as though something led her, each evening, to exactly the page that the next day would call for. She would open the book, at random, of an evening, meaning only to read a little, and her eye would fall on an entry, an old case, a family, and the next day, sure enough, that very family would send for her, that very case would come. It happened too often to be always chance. And Cecilia, who was a woman of sense and science and did not believe in fancies, found herself, all the same, unable quite to explain it, and let it be, and was grateful and read on. She was not a fanciful woman. Her whole training had been in observation, in evidence, in the patient weighing of what could be seen and measured and known. She had no patience with ghosts or omens, or the vaporings of the credulous. And yet here was this small, quiet mystery, in her own surgery, in her own hands each evening, that all her sense could not explain. The way the book seemed, gently, to know. And there were notes in the margins, here and there, in a different ink, fresher than the rest, as though added later. Small notes, a line or two, in the old hand, but newer, that seemed sometimes almost to speak to her, the reader, rather than to record a case. A word of counsel, a note of encouragement. Once, beside a difficult case, the words "be patient and kind, and they will trust you in the end," which Cecilia read late one night and found had brought tears to her eyes, though she could not have said quite why. She thought the old doctor must have gone back through his book at the end before he gave it up, and added these notes for whoever should come after. A last kindness, a passing on of wisdom, and she was moved by them and grateful, and read them as though they were meant for her, which, in a way, she supposed they were. There was one, beside the record of a hard winter of much sickness, that said only, "Do not lose heart. The spring always comes." And Cecilia, reading it late on a tired evening, after a long cold day of doubtful faces, had felt it steady her like a hand on the shoulder. There was another, besides some case she could not quite make out, that said they are worth it, everyone, which she thought the truest thing she had ever read about the work she had given her life to. Whoever had written them, and whenever, they seemed to know exactly the doubts and weariness of a young doctor alone in a strange town, and they comforted her, night after night, more than she could have explained to anyone, so that she came to look for them as she read. The small, fresh, kindly notes in the margins of the old book, and to feel, when she found one, that she was not, after all, quite alone in her work. She met the old doctor himself that first week, called on him, as he had asked, at the White House with the green door along the square. And she liked him at once, and he her. He was a fine old man, Reginald Fothergill, tall and stooped and courtly, with a kind lined face and gentle failing eyes, and a great shock of white hair, a little deaf now, and his hands trembling with age, but his mind clear and his heart warm, and his love of the town he had doctored for 40 years shining out of him. He welcomed Cecilia with a grave, old-fashioned courtesy, and was not in the least put out that his successor was a young woman, but rather delighted by it. He had followed the question of women in medicine with keen interest, he told her, all his life, and thought it a fine thing, a very fine thing, and was proud, he said, that his old town should have one of the first of them for its doctor. "You'll do well here," he told her, over the tea his own old housekeeper brought them. "They're good folk, the townsfolk, sound good folk, only slow and wary of what's new. They'll doubt you a while, being a woman, and young, but they'll come round. Do the work well, and be kind and be patient, and they'll come round and take you to their hearts and never let you go. I know them. 40 years I've known them. Be patient with them, my dear, and they'll be yours." Cecilia thanked him, warmed by his kindness, and then, because she could not help it, she asked him about the casebook. She told him she had found it and had been reading it, and how useful it had been to her, how grateful she was for it. And she asked him, half laughing, whether he had meant to leave it for her, and whether he had added the notes in the margins for whoever should come after. The old man looked at her with his gentle, failing eyes, and seemed for a moment a little puzzled. "The casebook," he said. "Aye, my old casebook. I left it in the desk, did I? Well, I'm glad it's of use to you." He paused and seemed about to say more, and then did not, and Cecilia had the odd impression, for a moment, that he was as puzzled by something as she was, that there was something about the book he did not quite understand himself. But he only smiled and patted her hand and said, "Read it, my dear, read it, and welcome. There's 40 years of the town in there. It'll serve you well." And he would say no more about it. And Cecilia, not liking to press an old man, let it be, and turned the talk to other things, and went away, at last, warmed by his kindness, but no wiser about the book. And the book went on serving her, all through those golden autumn weeks, exactly as he had said, going before her, knowing her cases, guiding her hand, so that patient by patient, week by week, Cecilia grew surer and abler and more at home in her doctoring, and the town, slowly, warily, began to come round. They were slow, as the old man had said, slow and wary and doubtful of the young lady doctor, but she did the work well, and was kind, and was patient, and one by one, family by family, they began to trust her. The mother of the feverish child told her neighbours that the lady doctor had a good, gentle way with a frightened child. The old man with the bad chest told the tap room that she knew her business, and had eased him as well as ever old Fothergill did. And slowly the word went round, from mouth to mouth, in the slow, sure way of a country town, that the new doctor, woman or no, was a good one. And slowly the doubtful looks softened, and the calls came more freely, and Cecilia felt herself, week by week, beginning to be trusted, beginning to belong. It was a slow, sweet thing to feel, that turning of the town, a nod in the square where before there had been only a stare, a woman stopping to thank her for a child made well, a farmer touching his hat, an old body at a cottage door saying, "Come in, doctor, come in, and welcome," as though she had always been their doctor and always would be. Each small warming was a treasure to her, gathered and kept, for she had come so doubtful, so braced for coldness, that every kindness fell on her like sunlight, and she felt herself, week by golden week, thawing into the warm, slow life of the town, becoming a little less the stranger and a little more its own. And each evening, when the day's work was done, she sat by the lamp in the quiet surgery and read a little more in the old casebook, and felt the old doctor's 40 years of care and knowledge flowing quietly into her own, and was grateful and comforted and less alone, and did not try any longer to explain the strange way the book had of knowing what she needed, but only accepted it gratefully, as one more of the quiet kindnesses that had gathered about her since she came, and let it guide her and read on. The call to the far farm came on a still golden afternoon in the last week of September, and it was the longest and loneliest round Cecilia had yet been asked to make. It was a shepherd's holding, right out on the edge of the heath, miles from the town, where an old couple lived alone with their sheep, far from any neighbour. And word had come in that morning that the old man was poorly, had taken a chill, and could not shake it, and would the doctor come? And Cecilia, who had read of them in the Casebook only the night before, the lonely, proud old couple on the heath, went readily, had Walter bring the pony trap round, and packed her bag, and set off in the golden afternoon, out of the town, and along the winding lanes, and out onto the wide, lonely heath, to visit her farthest patient. Walter Ashby drove her, as he always did on the longer rounds. A bright, willing boy of 13, quick and cheerful and proud beyond measure of his place as the doctor's driver, who knew every lane and farm and shortcut for miles about, and chattered happily all the way, telling Cecilia the names of the places they passed and the families that lived in them, so that she was learning the country mile by mile through the boy's bright talk. She had grown fond of Walter in her weeks in the town. He was her guide and her helper and her small cheerful companion on the long rounds, and she was glad of him on the lonely lanes, glad of his chatter and his company and his bright freckled face. He had been half afraid of her at first, she thought, as the whole town had been, the strange young lady doctor. But he had warmed to her quickly over the long rounds, and now treated her with a mixture of stout protectiveness and cheerful comradeship that touched and amused her. He carried her bag and held the pony and told the farmers proudly that this was Dr. Draycott and she was wanted within, and he had appointed himself, without a word said, her guardian and champion on the road, so that Cecilia, who had come so alone, found she had, in this bright, freckled boy of 13, her first true friend in the town, and was warmed by it more than she would have thought a grown woman could be warmed by the friendship of a boy. They drove out through the golden afternoon, the pony trotting steady, the trap swaying gently, out of the town and along the winding lanes between the harvested fields and the turning hedgerows, and out at last onto the open heath, a wide, lonely, rolling country of gorse and heather and rough grass, stretching away to the flat, far horizon under the enormous Norfolk sky, empty and still and golden in the low afternoon light. And Cecilia sat in the swaying trap and looked out at it, the wide, lonely heath, and felt the deep peace of it, the vast, quiet, golden emptiness, so different from the close town, and thought that she was glad, after all, to have come to be a country doctor, glad of these long, lonely golden rounds through such country as this, glad of the wideness and the quiet and the beauty of it. She had not expected to love it so, the country doctoring. She had trained in the great grey city, in crowded wards and busy streets, and had thought, when she took this quiet country post, that she took it only because no other was to be had. But she had found, in these golden weeks, that it suited her to the ground, the long, lonely drives through beautiful country, the scattered farms and cottages, the slow, deep rhythm of country life, the being the one doctor for miles of quiet land and knowing, in time, every soul in it. It was a good life, a deeply good life, and she had fallen into the love of it almost without noticing, so that now, driving out across the golden autumn heath to her farthest patient, she could not imagine wishing to be anywhere else, or anything else, than what she was, a country doctor on her rounds in the low gold light of a September afternoon. The shepherd's cottage stood alone at the heath's far edge, a low stone place with a few wind-bent trees and a huddle of sheep pens, miles from anywhere. And the old shepherd's wife came out to meet them, a spare, weathered old woman, proud and shy, twisting her apron in her hands. And Cecilia, remembering what the Casebook had told her, the pride and the poverty of them, the gentle care one must take not to wound, was gentle and courteous, and asked to see the old man as though it were the most natural thing in the world, and made no fuss and offered no charity, and so was let in, where a blunter, prouder manner might have been turned away at the door. The heath lay all about the little cottage, vast and golden and empty in the late light, the gorse still faintly gold, the heather gone soft and purple-grey, a curlew calling somewhere far off, the huge Norfolk sky arching over all. And Cecilia, pausing a moment at the cottage door before she went in, looked out at it and thought she had never seen anywhere so lonely, nor so beautiful, and that it was a wonder and a mercy that the old doctor had come out all this long way, all these 40 years, to tend the two old souls who lived in the midst of it, so far from every help. The old shepherd was in his box bed in the corner of the low room, and he was poorly indeed, feverish and weak, with a heavy chill on his chest. But it was not grave, Cecilia saw with relief, not yet, not past mending, if he were properly tended. And she tended him, sounded his chest, and eased his breathing, and left the right medicines, and told his wife how to nurse him, how to keep him warm, what to feed him, when she would come again. And she did it all with such calm, gentle sureness, such quiet kindness, that the proud, shy old couple were won quite over, and thanked her awkwardly, warmly, and the old woman, seeing her out, pressed on her, shyly, a little twist of honey from their own a few bees, the only thing they had to give and would not be refused. And Cecilia took it graciously, knowing it would wound them to refuse, and thanked the old woman as though it were a great gift, which, from them, it was. She sat a while with them, after, longer than she need have, drinking a cup of their strong black tea by their little fire, letting the old man rest easier for her nearness, and the old woman talk out her worry. For she had learned, from the Casebook and from her own kind heart, that half of doctoring the lonely is simply the sitting with them, the being there, the easing of the great loneliness that is itself a kind of illness in such far-flung folk. And the old couple, who saw almost no one, warmed to her sitting there, and told her a little of their long, hard, good life on the heath, their sheep, their bees, the 40 years the old doctor had come out to them. And Cecilia listened and was moved, and felt herself let a little further into the deep, slow life of the country she had come to serve. It was as she was leaving the cottage in the low gold light that the strange thing happened. The old woman, seeing her to the trap, thanking her again, said suddenly, peering at her with her old weathered face, You do put me in mind of the old doctor, my dear. For all you're a young lady and he an old man, Dr. Fothergill. The way you are with a body, the gentleness of you. He were just so. 40 years he come out to us, here on the heath when we was ill, never too far nor too much trouble, always gentle, always kind. And another thing. She paused and looked at Cecilia and seemed to hesitate, and then she said, there were a book, his book. He wrote in it, always, sitting there where you sat just now, after he'd seen to us. Wrote it all down, he did, every visit in his little book. Kept us all in it, he said, the whole town. She nodded slowly. You've the same way with you, writing us down, keeping us. He'd be glad, I reckon, to see it carried on. He set such store by that book. Cecilia, who had not been writing anything down, who had left her own new casebook at home, felt a small, cool touch go through her. But she only smiled and thanked the old woman and said something gentle and climbed into the trap. And it was not until they were driving back out across the golden heath in the slanting light that she let herself think about it, the strange thing the old woman had said. For she had spoken of the casebook as though it were a living thing, a continuing thing, as though the old doctor were writing in it still. He set such store by that book. He'd be glad to see it carried on. And Cecilia, driving back through the gold, found herself thinking about the book, the strange kind book that seemed to know her days before she did, that guided her hand and eased her way and left her small kind notes in its margins, and about the missing pages and the fresh notes in the old faded hand, and about the old doctor's puzzled look when she had asked him of it, as though there was something about the book he did not understand himself. And she felt, driving back across the golden heath, the whole gentle mystery of the book gather close about her, sweet and strange and not quite explicable, and she did not try any longer to explain it. She had stopped trying somewhere in those golden weeks to explain the book. She was a woman of science, and it went against her training to let a mystery lie unexamined. But she had found that this one would not yield to examination, and that the more she tried to explain it, the more it slipped away, and that in the end it did not matter. The book was kind. That was the whole of it. Whatever it was, however it worked, whyever it seemed to know, it was kind. It wished her well. It guided her and eased her and taught her and comforted her, and asked nothing in return. And Cecilia, who had come to the town so alone, so doubted, so braced against coldness, had learned in her weeks there to receive kindness where she found it, and not to question it too closely. And she received the kindness of the book as she received the slow, warming kindness of the town, gratefully, wonderingly, without demanding to understand it. There was a kind of peace she had found in letting a mystery be, a peace her scientific training had never taught her, and that the town and the book had taught her instead. Not everything she was learning must be pulled apart to be understood. Some things are truer whole. Some kindnesses are deeper for being unexplained. She had given her life to knowing, to the patient uncovering of how things worked, and it was strange and sweet to find, here in this quiet town, that there were things she was content, at last, simply not to know, and to receive, and to be grateful for, and to love. They drove back into the town as the light was going, the pony trotting home eager to its stable, the lamps being lit in the square, and Cecilia was tired and content with the good deep tiredness of a long day's work well done. She had eased an old man's chest and won an old couple's trust, and driven miles across a golden heath, and been called kind, and been given honey. And she thought, sitting in the trap in the dusk as they came into the square, that she was happy, that she had not been so happy in all her striving life as she had been in these few golden weeks of doctoring this quiet town. The heath turned from gold to grey to blue behind them as they drove, the first stars pricking out in the great darkening sky, the pony's hooves steady on the darkening lane. Walter grown quiet at last and drowsy beside her, and Cecilia sat wrapped in her shawl in the swaying trap and watched the dusk come down over the wide country, and felt the deep, sweet peace of it settle into her bones. This was hers now, all of it. The town, the heath, the lonely farms, the scattered folk, the long gold rounds, and the quiet blue drives home. She was their doctor. She belonged to them, and they to her. And there was no gladness, she thought, in all the world, quite like the gladness of belonging after so long alone. That evening, after her supper, she sat as always by the lamp in the quiet surgery, and took up the old Casebook to read a little before bed. And she turned, half without thinking, to the entries about the heath, the lonely shepherd's family she had visited that day. And she read the old doctor's notes of his 40 years of visiting them, his care for them, his gentleness with their pride. And she came, at the end of the entries, to a note in the margin, in the fresh, newer ink, that she was almost sure had not been there before. A small note, a line only, that said, "They gave you the honey, I see. They never gave it to a stranger. You are one of us now." Cecilia sat very still, with the book open before her in the lamplight, and read the little note again, and felt the tears come to her eyes. For it spoke of that very day, of the honey the old woman had pressed on her that very afternoon, a thing that had happened only hours before, miles out on the heath, that no one could have known, that no one could have written down. And yet here it was, in the margin, in the old faded hand, fresh and newly inked. "They gave you the honey, I see. You are one of us now." She turned the page and turned it back and looked at the note, and could not explain it, could not begin to explain it. And she felt the whole sweet strangeness of the book wash over her. And she was not afraid, not in the least, for there was nothing in it but kindness. But she was moved deeply, past all her science, past all her sense, moved by the impossible tender kindness of it, the sense of being watched over, welcomed, gathered in, told by some kind unfathomable agency in the margin of an old book that she was one of them now, that she belonged. She thought of all the margin notes she had found these golden weeks, the words of counsel, the small encouragements. "Be patient, and they will trust you. Do not lose heart. They are worth it, everyone." She had taken them, till now, for the old doctor's parting wisdom, written before he gave up the book, general counsel for whoever should come after. But this one was not general. This one spoke of that very day, that very honey, that very afternoon on the heath, This one was for her, Cecilia, and for no one else, and could not have been written before she came. And she gave up then and, quite finally, the last of her trying to explain it, and let it be the sweet, impossible kind mystery that it was, and only sat and held the book and was grateful, past all understanding, that whatever watched over her from its worn old pages wished her so well. She closed the book gently at last and sat a long while in the lamplight, holding it in her lap, her hand resting on its worn leather cover, and she did not try to understand it. She only held it, the kind, strange book, and looked into the low fire, and let the deep, sweet sense of belonging fill her. And she thought that whatever the book was, and however it knew, it had told her only the truth. She was one of them now. She had come a stranger, doubted and alone, and the town had taken her in, patient by patient, kindness by kindness, week by golden week. And she was theirs now, and they were hers, and she belonged, at last, after all her lonely striving, somewhere in the world entirely, and was home. She thought of the girl she had been not so very long ago, the anxious young woman on the station platform, her doctor's bag in her hand, braced against a town that did not want her. Sure, she must fight for every scrap of trust, alone. And she looked at what she was now, a few short, golden weeks later, the trusted doctor of the town, sitting in her own surgery by her own fire, with the town's honey in her cupboard, and the town's children made well by her hands, and the town's slow, deep welcome gathered warm about her. The town had taken her in. The book had told her so, in the margin, in the old kind hand. And whether it was the book that had known, or the town that had decided, or some gentle agency she would never understand, it did not matter now, for she was one of them, and she was home, and the long, lonely fight was over, and she was, at the last, exactly where she had always meant to be, doing the work she had always meant to do among people who wanted her. And that was enough. That was everything. She asked no more. The harvest festival came to the town at the very end of September, and it was, for Cecilia, the day on which she knew, past all doubting, that she had become the town's own. She had been dreading it a little, if she were honest. For a town's festival is the town at its most itself, its most gathered, its most close, and she had feared to stand at the edge of it, still a stranger, still the doubtful outsider, watching the town be a town, and knowing herself no part of it. But it was not so. It was not so at all. For when she came down to the church that harvest morning, in her good dark dress, uncertain and a little shy, she found herself gathered in at once, greeted, welcomed, made much of, her hand shaken, her health asked after, a place made for her in the very heart of the town's great day, as though she had always belonged there and always would. The old church glowed with it, the harvest, the good gold light coming in at the plain windows and lying warm on the heaped corn and fruit, on the bowed heads and the Sunday clothes, on the old grey stone that had seen 400 harvests come and go. The organ played, the voices rose, the scent of the corn and the apples and the chrysanthemums filled the warm air, and Cecilia, standing in her pew among her people, singing the old words she had sung as a child in another church far away, felt herself part of something very old and very deep and very good. the long, slow turning of the country year, the ancient rhythm of sowing and reaping and giving thanks, into which she had been, this golden autumn, so gently and so wholly gathered. And she saw, looking about the crowded church, how many of them were hers now, hers to tend, hers to care for, bound to her by the quiet ties of the sick room and the healing hand. There was the thin, anxious mother, her child well again, and Rosie on her knee, who smiled at Cecilia now across the church, all her doubt long gone. There was the old man, whose chest she had eased, singing lustily in his pew. There were a score of faces she knew now, had tended, had helped, had won. The whole town, it seemed, gathered under one roof and threaded all through it, like a bright thread through cloth, the quiet work of her own hands these golden weeks. She had come a stranger a month or two before, and doubted whether one soul would ever trust her. And here she sat in the harvest church, the trusted doctor of them all, woven into the very fabric of the town. It was almost more than her full heart could hold. Old Dr. Fothergill was there, in the place of honour, white-haired and courtly and beaming. And after the service, in the churchyard in the golden noon, he came to Cecilia, leaning on his stick, and took her hand in both his trembling old ones, and looked at her with his gentle failing eyes, and said, "There, you see, I told you they would come round, and they have. You're theirs now, my dear, and they're yours, and there's no finer thing in all the world. I doctored them 40 years, and I know. There's no finer thing than to be the doctor of a town that trusts you." And his old eyes were bright, and Cecilia, moved, pressed his hands and thanked him, and thought that she owed so much of it to him, the kind old man, and to his town, and to his strange kind book. The book, she thought of it, standing in the golden churchyard among the harvest crowds. And on an impulse, later that day, when the festival service was done, and before the feasting began, she slipped back to the surgery, alone to look at it once more. For she had woken that morning, the harvest morning, and gone down early to the surgery, as had become her habit, to read a little in the casebook before the day began. And she had found, for the first time since she came, that there was nothing new, no fresh note in the margin, no page that spoke to the day. The book lay just as she had left it, the old entries and the old notes, and nothing added, nothing new. And she had felt, for a moment, a small cool touch of loss, as though a friend had fallen silent. And now, in the quiet surgery, with the harvest bells ringing over the town and the feast being laid in the square, she took up the old book once more and turned its pages and understood. And the loss turned, even as she felt it, into something warm and whole and right. The book had fallen silent because it did not need to speak any more. That was the whole of it. She sat in her leather chair, with the old casebook open in her lap in the golden harvest light, and understood it clearly and gently and completely. The book had been her guide through the frightening early weeks, when she came a stranger, knowing nothing, doubted by all. It had gone before her and taught her the town and eased her way, and left her its small kind notes. "Be patient, they are worth it, you are one of us now." It had gathered her in, page by page, note by note, as the town itself had gathered her in, patient by patient, week by week. And now the work was done. She knew the town now. She did not need the book to tell her its families, its histories, its ailments, for she carried them in her own head and heart, gathered in her own new casebook, learned by her own hands. She was trusted now. She did not need the margin notes to tell her to be patient, and she would be trusted, for she was trusted wholly, the town's own doctor, and she belonged now. She did not need to be told in the margin that she was one of them, for she knew it all the way down, past all doubting. The book had fallen silent because its work was complete, because Cecilia no longer needed it to know and belong and be at home. It had walked beside her until she could walk alone, and now she could, and so, its gentle task accomplished, it had grown quiet and let her go, not in coldness, but in the deep contentment of a thing wholly and perfectly done. It was like a lamp carried before you through a dark, strange house, she thought, until you know your way, and then set down, no longer needed, because you can find your own way now in the dark. The lamp is not unkind to be set down. Its work is done, and the book had been just such a lamp, carried before her through the dark, strange early days, lighting her way until she knew it, and now set gently down, its light no longer needed, because she could find her own way now, sure-footed, at home, in the town that was hers. She sat a long while with the silent book in her lap, in the golden harvest light, and she was not sad, after all, not sad in the least. She was filled instead with a deep, still gratitude, and a great tenderness, for the kind, strange book that had walked her home. She would never understand it. She had given up trying, and was glad she had, for some things she had learned are truer for not being understood, and the kindness of the book was one of them. She did not know what it was, or how it had known, or whose the hand was that had written in its margins the things that comforted her, the things no living soul could have known. She knew only that it had been kind, wholly kind, from her first frightened morning to her last, that it had wished her nothing but welcome and belonging and home, and that it had given her all three, and asked nothing, and now, its work done, had fallen gently silent, and she was grateful past all words and past all understanding, and she closed the old book gently and held it a moment to her breast, and then set it back in its place in the deep drawer of the desk where she had found it, where it belonged. She would keep it always, she thought, closing the drawer. She would keep it and cherish it and add to it, in her turn, her own 40 years of doctoring the town, if she were spared so long, would fill its remaining pages and more with her own record of the town's healing, its births and its ailments, and its long, slow chronicle of care, and would leave it at the last when her own time came to give up the practice, for whoever should come after her, as old Fothergill had left it for her. And perhaps, she thought, with a small smile she did not quite understand, perhaps she too, at the end, might add a note or two in the margins, for that one who should come after. A word of counsel, a small encouragement, be patient and kind, and they will trust you in the end. That the strange, sweet kindness of the book might go on, from doctor to doctor, from age to age, watching over each new frightened stranger, gathering each one in as it had gathered her. She did not know how such a thing could be. but she had stopped needing to know how things could be, and she liked the thought. And she left it, smiling, and went out into the golden harvest afternoon, to the feast and the town and her own new life. And she thought, with a deepening wonder, of all the doctors there must have been before old Fothergill, back and back through the years, of whether each of them too, coming young and frightened to the town, had found the book waiting and been guided by it and comforted and gathered in, of whether the strange kind knowing of it was not old Fothergill's alone, but something far older that had watched over every doctor the town had ever had, and would watch over everyone to come. She did not know, she would never know, but the thought filled her with a strange, deep peace, a sense of standing in a long line of care stretching back into the shadows and forward into the light. Each doctor gathered in and made the town's own, each in their turn taking up the long, kind work of healing and passing it on. She was part of that now. She had been gathered into it, and one day, in her turn, she would pass it on. The harvest feast was held in the market square, the whole town at long tables in the golden light, and Cecilia was at the heart of it, her health drunk, her praises sung, her hand shaken, her cheek kissed by the mothers of children she had healed. Dinah Meacham beamed over her like a proud parent. Young Walter Ashby swaggered with the importance of being the doctor's own driver. Old Fothergill raised a trembling glass to her from the head of the table. And even Miss Selina Large, the formidable postmistress, the very pillar and touchstone of the town's opinion, unbent so far as to tell Cecilia, graciously, that the town was fortunate in its new doctor, which was, from Miss Larch, as Dinah whispered delightedly, the very highest seal of acceptance the town could bestow. For Miss Larch approved of very little, and no one, it was said, had ever known her to praise a newcomer. She had kept the post office 30 years and knew everything about everybody, and her good opinion was the hardest won and most valued in the town. And she had given it to Cecilia, plainly, before them all, at the harvest feast, and the town, seeing it, took the last of its reservations and put them quietly away, so that from that golden afternoon there was not a soul in all the town who did not count the lady doctor one of their own. And Cecilia sat among them all in the golden square, in the warm heart of the town that had taken her in, and was as happy as she had ever been in all her striving life, or ever would be, or ever could imagine being. Late in the afternoon, when the feast was at its height, she slipped away for a moment alone, to the edge of the square, to stand quietly and look at it all. The long tables, the warm crowd, the golden light, the whole town gathered and glad. Her town now, her people, her place in the world. And she thought of the strange golden weeks that had brought her here, from the anxious stranger on the station platform to the beloved doctor of the town, and of the slow warming of the doubtful town, and of the kind strange book that had walked beside her all the way, and now lay silent in its drawer, its gentle work complete. And she was filled, standing there, with a gratitude and a gladness and a peace so deep and so complete that it was almost more than her full heart could hold. She thought of her family, far away, who had gently doubted her and wished her an easier life, and she loved them and would write to them and tell them she was happy, happier than they could dream, But this was her place now. She had made it herself, out of long years of striving and a few short golden weeks of winning, had made herself a doctor against all discouragement, and made herself a home against all doubt, and stood now in the golden square of the town that was hers, needed, trusted, wanted, at home. All she had ever longed for, through the long, grey, striving years, she had here: work that mattered, done well, a place of her own, and a whole town that was glad she had come. It was everything. She had everything. She did not need the book anymore. She understood that fully, standing at the edge of the golden square. She had it still, and would keep it always, and cherish it. But she did not need it any longer to know that she was welcome, that she was trusted, that she belonged, for she knew it now, past all telling, in her very bones. The book had gathered her in. The town had taken her home, and Cecilia Draycott, who had fought so long and so hard to be a doctor, and come so far and so alone to a town that did not want her, stood now in the golden harvest square, the beloved and trusted doctor of them all, wanted and needed and at home. And she looked out at the warm, gathered town in the golden light, and knew that she had come, at the last, exactly where she had always meant to be. And now the harvest lamps are burning low in the square, and the last of the feast is cleared away, and over the quiet Norfolk town the September stars are coming softly out. The church stands dark and peaceful, its harvest corn still sweet within. The market square lies still under the gas lamps, and in the old surgery on the square, the fire has burned low in the grate, and the leather chair waits empty by the window, and the worn old casebook rests quiet in its drawer, its gentle work all done. Let the fire settle to its embers. Let the lamp burn softly down. Let the little town breathe slow and easy under its harvest stars, warm and gathered in, holding all its sleepers safe. Wherever you have travelled, and however hard you have had to fight for your place in the world, there is a place kept for you tonight, warm and waiting, with a fire lit and a soft bed turned down. Your long road has led you home. You are trusted here. You are wanted. You are home. So let your eyes grow heavy and your breath grow slow and deep, and rest now in the warm and quiet dark. Somewhere a lamp has been left burning for you. Somewhere a place has been kept. Sleep now, dear one, wanted and trusted and safe, in the town that is glad you came. Good night.